Good evening. At the grocery store, I came upon this magazine about vampires, and I thought I would read a little bit out of it. This is a different kind of video. Not going to read the whole thing for various reasons, including I don't know if this is like a copyright problem or something. But this part in particular is talking about how people thought that vampires were real when they would look at a dead body. So, gonna start out, and we got a thunderstorm going on outside. Hopefully you can hear fine. Both me and me over the rain. Stories about vampires have been circulating for thousands of years. In Vampires, Burial, and Death, Folklore and Reality, Paul Barber tells us that folkloric vampires who flitted from India to China to Greece are among humanity's oldest horror images. Dead people who, having died before their time, not only refused to remain dead but returned to bring death to their friends and neighbors. In ancient Greece, the decaying corpses of a warrior whose death went unavenged allegedly returned from limbo at night to torment his family. If his relatives failed to murder his murderer, the dead warrior would return in increasingly repugnant degrees of decay, effectively vampirizing his own kin. The undead called this word that I have no idea how to pronounce, Varicolacus. We'll just go with that. The undead, called that word, would kill them, suck their blood, and animate himself enough to go on to the hereafter. I've never heard that word before. We got a picture up here. And here we've got, in Bohemia, locals pried open a coffin containing the remains of someone believed to be a vampire and plunged a red-hot iron through the skeleton's chest. And here's the guy plunging the red-hot iron into the skeleton's chest. Got a pick. Guy, I guess with another pick. Some other folks in the background. Here we have men gathered around the Transylvanian grave of a vampire as one of them blasts the creature in the heart. Here's the guy with his gun doing that. Looks like, I'm not sure what that is, if that's an ice pick or what. That guy's got a hammer. I think that's another gun. Oh. In their sagas, the Scandinavians refer to corporeally. Maybe I should have. I thought. I can read it for the first time on camera. That's fine. And then the section I choose has words I've never heard before. In their sagas, the Scandinavians refer to corporally risen undead, the... Oh no. I have more not English words. Gegenganger and Draugr, who would attack the living and spread sickness, madness, and death. Well, I guess it doesn't really matter if it's an English word or not, since we have hereafter and corporally or whatever in there. Doesn't have to be in another language for me. I have no idea how to pronounce it. I think the Draugr were like, I think I've heard of those before, and they're kind of like zombie, like undead warriors. Oh, I don't know if you can hear that or not, but there's the thunder. So these risen undead would attack the living and spread sickness, madness, and death. Already in the 12th century, the English were relating stories of the malevolent undead, said Al Ridenour. And of course, even the guy's name has to be something I've never heard before. Said Al Ridenour, host of the podcast Bone and Sickle, a celebration of the intersection of horror, folklore, and history. I'm not talking about ghosts, but physical revenants like vampires. William of Newburgh's Historia. Literally, what's the deal? Now I have Latin in here. Oh boy. I could have picked any part of this whole thing, and this is the section I pick. Alright, great work. I just can't go like 4 sentences without stopping, can I? Hopefully you weren't entirely coming for just the story. I don't know, is this an ASMR video? I don't know. William of Newburgh's Historia Rerum and Glicarum, a chronicle of England from 1066 to 1198, mentions a lord who fails to make his final confession and dies, is raised bodily by Satan, beats villagers, and infects others. Well, that's a story. Okay. Geoffrey of Burton, this is a quote, we'll figure out who says it in a second here. Geoffrey of Burton relates an anecdote about some troublemakers who, once buried, arise by night to raise a ruckus, banging on the homes, shape-shifting between beast and human, and causing people in the town to mysteriously die, said Ridenour. In each case, the bodies are chopped up and burned to end the troubles. I'm not sure if I've heard of the cutting up the body thing. A lot of times there'd be like they'd separate the head. I've heard of that. Oh, actually, I guess there was a case, I think in Greece, where there was an old wall, it was like part of an old fort, and they found random, like, I think they found, like, the body without the head and, like, without some other random part or something, and, like, it was like, I kind of do remember there was something about, separating more parts than just the head, but I'm not sure. I mean, like, kind of how we think of, like, the heart as being, like, oh, that's the soul of the person or whatever now, where it's like, well, I mean, the brain is what the person is, not the heart, but there's kind of a thing about the head, like in the European cultures, where, like, I think it was the Celts that would go around on the battlefield once they thought that the dead were dead, and they would just behead all of them for good measure because they thought that, like, the soul was still in the head or something. So there's something about, like, the head. I'm not entirely sure all the reasons for that, but, like, that has some special significance that the person's soul can still come back, like, in an undead form if the head's left on. Though just about every culture has showcased some form of vampire, anthropologists generally consider them a Slavic invention. They haunted the lore of Albania, where they were known as... Seriously, why did I choose... It's not even that long of a section, and now I have all... Maybe I'll, like, put what the word is on the screen if you want to, like, Google it later or something, because you're not going to have any idea. I'm not going to pronounce these correctly at all. So, the anthropologists generally consider them a Slavic invention. They haunted the lore of Albania, where they were known as Vervalak, Bosnia, where they're called Lampir. Oh, I've heard of that. Croatia, Vukadlak is what they're called, and Montenegro, Tenats. Sorry, I know that was not pronounced right at all. Vampire comes from the Old Slavic word obyrapy. There's a Serbian word apparently that like literally is vampire without the E on the end. I think that's I've heard of that. I haven't heard of this word though. If anything unites the pre-Serbian undead, it would be the spreading of a mysterious plague, said Ridenar. The sickness was not passed on necessarily by direct contact or bites, but could be more of an evil miasma that accompanied the undead rising from the grave. Plague survivors looking for a scapegoat would blame the first victim. According to Ridenar, our modern idea of what constitutes a vampire originated in the early 18th century, when Austrian administrators in Serbia got entangled in some undead mischief that mushroomed into something now known as the vampire panic. There were several waves of the panic beginning in 1718, with dozens of mysterious deaths blamed on recently buried villagers rising from their graves, he said. In 1725, a few days after the death of Peter Pologojowicz, you know at this point, we're just doing our best over here. A few days after the death of this guy in the village of this place, Kisilova. I just cannot. Okay. In 1725, a few days after the death of Peter Pologojowicz, in the village of Kisilova, the Serbian peasant returned from the grave, appearing before his son and demanding food. Peter's son fed him, but the next night, when he returned begging for more, the boy refused. The following morning, the son was found dead, and then 9 neighbors died in short order, most claiming in delirium that Peter had returned to strangle them in their sleep. When word spread that the old man's wife had fled after her undead husband turned up to look for a pair of shoes, I mean, you know that's what it's going to be, right? It's not, I'm showing up to kill all the people who annoyed me in the village to get revenge. It's, no, I'm looking for my shoes. When word spread that the old man's wife had fled after her undead husband turned up to look for a pair of shoes, the parish priest and Austrian imperial provisor for the district agreed to witness an exhumation. To the horror of everyone present, Peter was not only completely intact in his grave. Peter was not only completely intact in his grave, but his hair and nails had grown. A stake was hurriedly pounded into his chest. Only much later was it discovered that the 9 townsfolk had died of pneumonic plague. Outbreaks of vampire hysteria in the Austrian Empire culminated in the official investigation into the case of Serbian Hajduk infantryman Arnold Paole, who in 1727 returned to his hometown of Medvedga, near Kosovo, claiming that he had been assaulted by a vampire. He ate soil from his supposed assailant's grave and smeared himself with blood to stave off the attacks, only to die in a fall from a hay wagon a few weeks later. Again, just classic. I mean, that guy survived a vampire attack, survived plague, famine, probably, all that, dies falling out of a hay wagon. Within 30 days of his burial, 4 villagers had died, each with a small incision in his throat, the edges of which were purple. The consensus: this was the work of a vampire. The people, puzzled and eager to discover the vampire delinquent, at last recollected that Arnold Paole had often related how in what is up with these words? Environs of Kosovo? Is that like the environment? The people, puzzled and eager to discover the vampire delinquent, at last recollected that Arnold Paoli had often related how in the environs of Kasava, on the frontiers of Serbia, he had been tormented and worried by a Turkish vampire. Read one early account. This, according to the fundamental laws of vampirism, because that's a thing that exists, should have converted Arnold into a vampire in his grave, for all those who are passive vampires on Earth invariably become vampires active from when they descend to the tomb. From these humble beginnings sprang the legend of Arnold Paoli, the first prominent revenant in the region. A young girl from Medvedia claimed that she had woken in the middle of the night with a feeling of being suffocated. A lot of these things, I've never had sleep paralysis. It sounds terrifying, so I'm glad I haven't. But a lot of these things where it's like people think there's a monster, it usually ends up it's sleep paralysis. It's like, oh, the monster, the demon, or whatever was pinning them down. They couldn't get up when they were sleeping. It's awake and here's this creepy thing, and they can't move. Which, I mean, you don't need a monster that's already terrifying to experience that, I bet. In the dim light, she recognized Paoli and cried, "Avaunt, vampire, in Jesus' name," and the vampire instantly vanished. To quell the resulting panic, 40 days after Paoli's death, community leaders disinterred, again with the words I've never heard before, disinterred, okay, his body, so dug it up I guess, which was bloated as though engorged with blood and seemed unnaturally well preserved. Traces of blood were on his hands, his shirt, the inside of the coffin, and fresh blood spurted from his eyes. I think that's just a decomposition thing. It's like the body bloats up and then the stuff inside needs to release in some way. There is I think it was William the First of England that apparently there was some issue burying him, getting his body into the casket or something, and like his body ended up like exploding or something. Like that's, yeah, that, I don't know, that almost sounds scarier than the, well, I mean, if you actually think a vampire is roaming around the town, that would be terrifying too, but I mean, traces of blood were on his hands, his shirt, and inside the coffin, and fresh blood spurted from his eyes. That's apparently the middle of a sentence. Nose and mouth, which may have later cemented the association with blood drinking. Yeah, so just orifices is where blood's coming out. That, I mean, there's probably other stuff as well, just other fluids and stuff, but that would be the one that you'd probably really stick with you. While this was hardly clinching evidence that Paoli was a true vampire, his heart was nevertheless staked, which provoked an audible groan, as if he were still alive. He also bled copiously. Again, that would be releasing like the different gases and stuff that would have been inside of the corpse. So if you then are piercing it, you would get the release of that, which then would make a noise. Apparently, even a corpse without like intervention can move on its own. That's terrifying. Apparently, that's a thing that can happen as like different like I guess as different things are escaping and settling and various things of that sort. can end up with just, like, the body kind of contorts a bit on its own. So, I mean, all these things, if you don't know all, like, the scientific stuff, that'd be pretty terrifying. Really would seem like, oh, well, I mean, he made a sound when we did it, so obviously he was alive, and he moved a little bit, and there was blood, so obviously vampire. Here we've got a thing that says Varney the Vampire, or Feast of Blood, a romance of exciting interest, by the author of Grace Rivers or The Merchant's Daughter, London, E. Lloyd, Salisbury Square, and all booksellers. So that's all the places you can buy it, I guess. Printing number up there. Down here it says, the serialized Varney the Vampire is the first story in which a vampire sports sharp canine teeth. The work contains vivid illustrations and lurid descriptions. Lurid. I've not heard that before. Okay, just another word. Barney's quote-unquote eyes look like polished tin. The lips are drawn back. And his teeth are, quote, hideously, glaringly white and fang-like. So I guess this is the ad, and then here's an illustration of the book, or, serials, yeah, down here it says booksellers, so it's a book, I guess. So there he's got his sharp canine teeth. There's some guy back there, dressed like a nobleman. I'm assuming this is like the bedroom with like the curtains around the bed or something, and the girl's getting attacked by the vampire. We've got this very skeletal Varney, I guess, is his name. He's medieval devil-looking illustrations. And then the victim, I presume. Then what looks like probably... Oh, I guess there's the legs and the feet. So I guess he's standing like in on the top of a crypt or something. I'm not sure exactly. Some tomb thing. And it looks like a gravestone with the crossbones on it. Now that we're zoomed in, you can see his sharp canine teeth a little better. The dead Hadjuk was then decapitated, his body burned, and his ashes scattered. A first-hand report by a military surgeon named Flukinger was published in 1732 and widely circulated in Western Europe, setting off a debate among scholars as to the existence of vampires. The report contributed the stamp of scientific authority, which was helpful, since this is all taking place during the Enlightenment, said Rittendar. But English and German audiences already had similar stories from their own culture, although without the blood drinking or a stamp of scientific rationality. Just to be on the safe side, the Vatican denounced vampires. Empress Maria Theresa of Austria was so alarmed that she mandated that suspects could no longer be dug up. What would that accomplish? She was so alarmed that she mandated that suspects could no longer be dug up. Is that like she doesn't believe in vampires and she's like alarmed that, oh, the pagan superstition or whatever? Is this, I mean, because if you think there's a suspect, you'd want to dig them up, right? I mean, that's like the whole thing. So, I mean, if it's, maybe it was not, she was so alarmed about the vampires. I don't know, I'm a little confused at that. I'm not sure if she's alarmed at the vampires but then she'd want the body to be dug up, or she's alarmed that, like, the idea people think it's real or what exactly, not sure. Paul Barber wrote that there's nothing spooky about corpses that lack rigor mortis, ooze fluid blood, and haven't decomposed. Oh, okay, here we go. This was a section that I kind of picked this section out of the magazine. I thought it'd be interesting to hear about the science behind, like, the staking of the corpse and stuff like that. So this is going to explain it. Gases released by microorganisms cause the body to swell. The blood comes from the lungs, which are squeezed by the bloating. And a corpse buried in the ground doesn't rot as quickly as one exposed to the elements. And the groans? When a corpse is moved, Barbara explains, the decomposition of the chest forces air past the vocal cords in the larynx. The vampire lore was a folk hypothesis intended to account for the events of death and decomposition, Barbara says. I don't think it shows any kind of unintelligent perception of the world. The observations are clinically accurate. A 700-year-old skeleton discovered in Sozopol, Bulgaria, had been stabbed in the chest, pinned down with iron, and had its teeth extracted for fear that it would rise again. America's own vampire panic in New England. It's always New England, isn't it? All the supernatural creatures in New England. I'm assuming it's just the Puritans being paranoid. That's why all the different scary happenings are always in New England, in the United States, or before the United States technically existed, as the case may be. America's own vampire panic in New England ran from the late 1700s. Oh, okay. Ran from the late 1700s to the late 1800s. So this was quite a bit later. All right. Similar cases were documented in New Hampshire, Vermont, and Rhode Island, most linked to savage outbreaks of tuberculosis. In 1830, a vampire heart was reportedly torched on the town green of Woodstock, Vermont. In Manchester, New Hampshire, a 1793 heart-burning ceremony at a blacksmith's forge drew hundreds of onlookers. Timothy Mead officiated at the altar in the sacrifice to the demon vampire who it was believed was still sucking the blood of the then living wife of Captain Burton, an early town history says. It was the month of February, and good sleighing. Sleighing like you're riding in a sleigh. Alright, I mean, we like to hear about the one-horse open sleigh while we're taking out a vampire, I guess. The belief that circulated did not involve blood drinking corpses, but the notion that those who had appeared to die of tuberculosis would live on in the grave, somehow feeding off the lives of those in the community in the process, causing them to succumb to the disease, said Rittenauer. There were at least 40 recorded instances in which corpses were exhumed, their vital organs burned, and stakes driven through their hearts. The most famous and possibly last of those was Mercy Brown. During the 1880s, the town of Exeter, Rhode Island, was struck by an epidemic of consumption. During the 1880s, the town of Exeter, Rhode Island, was struck by an epidemic of consumption as tuberculosis was then called. Oh, okay. In 1883, Mary Eliza Brown died of the disease. Her oldest daughter, 20-year-old Mary Olive, died the following year. The entire town turned out for Mary Olive's funeral and sang One Sweetly Solemn Thought, a hymn that she had picked out for the occasion. Not long after, the same illness struck Mary Olive's 18-year-old brother Edwin, a strapping store clerk in excellent health. He left for Colorado Springs to take, quote-unquote, the cure. In January 1892, Edwin's 19-year-old sister Mercy Brown died. Then Edwin, having returned from Colorado Springs to Exeter, quote-unquote, in a dying condition, according to one newspaper account, took a turn for the worse. As he lingered on, a rumor gained purchase in the tight-knit farming community that the Brown family was cursed, and that one of the women was in fact not dead, but secretly a vampire who was feasting on the living tissue and blood of Edwin, as the Providence Journal later put it. They persuaded the children's father, George Brown, to allow the exhumation of all three bodies. Maybe. Let's see if I can see a little better if I... Oh, that just looks kind of weird on camera. Okay. Maybe... Well... We got a little more light in here now. Hopefully I can read the story more easily. And there's the air conditioner. Alright, that's fine. They persuaded the children's father, George Brown, to allow the exhumation of all three bodies. Wielding shovels and pitchforks, a party of men went to the family burial plot in Chestnut Hill Cemetery and dug up the bodies. It was winter time, and the remains of the long-dead Mary Eliza and Mary Olive were little more than bones. But the body of Mercy, who had died only a few months before and was kept mostly in a crypt above the ground, hadn't much deteriorated. The body was in a fairly well-preserved state, the Journal's correspondent wrote. The heart and liver were removed, and in cutting open the heart, clotted and decomposed blood was found. Though the presiding physician noted the presence of tuberculosis germs, the villagers interpreted the presence of fresh blood as a sign that Mercy was undead. To stop members of her family from meeting the same vampiric fate, they gathered firewood and kindled a bonfire on a nearby rock. Then they cut out Mercy's heart and lungs and burned them on the pyre. The ashes of her heart were brought back to the Brown homestead and mixed into a potion which was fed to the ailing Edwin. Evidently, the vampire remedy did little good. He died 2 months later. Following the 1892 death of Mercy Brown, her Rhode Island neighbors dug up her body, burned her heart, mixed the ashes with water, and gave the concoction to her brother Edwin, hoping it would cure his tuberculosis. It didn't. The townspeople then buried Mercy in Chestnut Hill Cemetery. So, thanks for joining me. I hope you found that interesting despite my various stopping and having issues pronouncing things and all that. But, yeah. I need to get better at these outros. And, oh, this is so awkward. What do I do? So, thanks for joining us, and I hope that you learned something interesting, that you enjoyed that despite my various issues pronouncing stuff and all that. And until next time. Okay, I guess that's what we're going with, I guess. I still don't have an in front of the camera outro. We'll miss it. Does that look good? I'm trying to get a thumbnail. I can't see this little tiny thing in the dark. I think the power just came back on. I think I heard the refrigerator make a little sound like it does when the power comes back on. Oh, and there we go. There's the air conditioning. It was getting real hot in here. The power went out from the thunderstorm. Thought, oh, this is a good enough time to read. With all the lanterns around, you know, it kind of sets an ambiance. Thought, oh, that seems like a good time to read the vampire book. But it was getting hot in here. It's in the middle of July. So that's nice, the air conditioner came back on. Should I move the camera down? How far does that go down? I have bats on here. I don't know if you can see it or not. Let's see. I could move it down a bit. Let's see. Okay, that was too much. Okay. Vampire comes from the old Slavic word literally, I'm like, oh, should I read the part about the actual bats? Can you see that? The actual bats. Oh, look at all those happy little bats on there. Oh no, that's not the section I choose. I choose the section where I suddenly have to figure out how to pronounce various different languages. Oh boy, okay. I should have read this beforehand. Not that I could have looked up how to pronounce the words anyway, since the power was out, but okay. Thought this was kind of interesting. Do we need more light? Oh, I don't think that was an improvement. Okay, hang on. I have a very weird setup here. Alright, I guess we'll go with that. Died in short order, most claiming... If I can get the other page to come out here. Oh. Is this the next page? And finally, I got the pages separated. Well, how long did that take? Alright, this is the most unprofessional book reading that ever existed, so... I thought it was going to be a little better than what it turned out being, but I mean, I guess it's just free entertainment. Vampire in his grave, for all those. I don't know, someone's running the sink. I'm trying to film a thing with sound. Okay.